My husband of 15 years brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner and introduced her to our entire family. When I confronted him, he smugly announced she would be taking my place in our home, our business, and our children's lives. What he didn't know was that my father had never transferred ownership of the family company that funded my husband's lavish lifestyle, and the documents proving it were in the briefcase my father brought to dinner that night. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Before we dive into this story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if this resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved an incredible story about betrayal and redemption that will leave you speechless. My name is Catherine Reynolds. At 42, I never imagined I would face public humiliation and betrayal at what should have been a celebration of our family's success and our marriage. The Reynolds name wasn't just a family name in Oakridge. It represented 3 generations of business leadership, community service, and the loving partnership I thought I had built with my husband, James. I met James Thornton during my final year at business school, where we were both pursuing our MBAs. While other classmates spent their time networking with industry giants, James focused on building relationships with local family businesses, mine included. "You have the perfect combination of intelligence and connections," he told me, after learning my father owned Reynolds Enterprises, our town's largest employer. "We'd make an unstoppable team." I was charmed by his ambition and what I perceived as genuine interest in my family's business philosophy. My father, Richard Reynolds, had built our manufacturing company from a small workshop into a regional powerhouse, always maintaining that treating employees like family was the key to success. James seemed to embrace this vision, impressing my father with questions about employee retention and community investment. We married shortly after graduation, and my father offered James a position in the company's management team. "Learn the business from the ground up," Dad advised. "Someday you may help Catherine lead this company, but only if you understand what makes it special." At first, James seemed eager to learn. He spent time on the factory floor, joined community outreach committees, and brought innovative ideas to management meetings. When our twins, Emma and Ethan, were born in 2009, he even advocated for expanding the company's parental leave policy, earning admiration from employees and my father alike. As the years passed, James rose through the ranks of Reynolds Enterprises, eventually becoming Chief Operating Officer while I served as Chief Financial Officer. We appeared to be the perfect power couple, successful executives raising well-adjusted children, active in community affairs, and living in a beautiful home that had been in my family for generations. Behind closed doors, however, our marriage had begun to show signs of strain. James became increasingly focused on projecting an image of success. He pushed for a more lavish lifestyle, a vacation home in Aspen, memberships at exclusive clubs, private schools for the children. When I questioned these expenses, citing our responsibility to live by the same careful financial principles we advocated for our company, he dismissed my concerns. "The Reynolds name means something in this town," he would say. "We have to look the part." My father watched these changes with growing concern. Though he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, serving as chairman of the board while James and I ran the company, he remained deeply connected to the business he had built. During our weekly lunches, he would gently probe about James's latest initiatives and spending proposals. "Remember, Catherine, appearances can be deceiving," he cautioned once after James had pushed through an expensive office renovation over the board's objections. "A business built on solid values doesn't need gold-plated faucets to prove its worth." I dismissed my father's concerns as generational differences in management style. James was modernizing our company's image, I reasoned, making us more attractive to the national clients we hoped to secure. Besides, our financial results remained strong, and employees seemed to appreciate the more upscale work environment. What I didn't realize was that James had been systematically undermining my position at the company. In meetings, he would subtly discount my financial projections, suggesting they were too conservative. He began scheduling important client meetings. When I had conflicts with the children's activities, knowing I wouldn't compromise on family commitments. When I raised concerns about some of his riskier proposals, he would smile indulgently and suggest that perhaps I wasn't keeping up with current market trends. "Catherine is brilliant with the historical aspects of our business," he would tell the board, "but we need forward-thinking strategies to remain competitive." My father observed these dynamics with increasing alarm, though I remained oblivious, attributing any tension to the natural stresses of running a family business. Then came our 15th anniversary and the annual Reynolds Enterprises family dinner, a tradition my father had established to thank employees and their families for their contributions to our success. The event was held each year at the Reynolds estate, the historic home where I had grown up and where James and I now lived with our children. This particular year was special. Not only was it our wedding anniversary, but also the 50th anniversary of Reynolds Enterprises' founding. My father had commissioned a special presentation chronicling the company's history, and I had spent weeks helping him collect photographs and milestone achievements. The evening of the dinner, I was putting final touches on the table arrangements when I received a text from James saying he would be arriving separately. "Picking up a special surprise for tonight. Don't wait for me." I thought nothing of it. James had been working late frequently, citing a major contract negotiation, and I assumed his surprise was an anniversary gift. I greeted arriving guests, our executive team, board members, and family friends, while keeping an eye out for my husband. When James finally arrived, he was not alone. A striking woman with copper hair and a fitted black dress stood beside him, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. I froze momentarily, then composed myself, assuming she must be the representative from the client he had been courting. "Catherine," James called across the room, his voice carrying enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "Come meet Diana." I crossed the room, social smile firmly in place despite the strange formality of his tone. Up close, I could see Diana was perhaps 10 years younger than me, with the polished look of someone accustomed to luxury. "Diana West," she extended her hand. "I've heard so much about you and this quaint family tradition." Before I could respond, James placed his arm around her waist in a gesture of intimacy that sent a shock through my system. "Diana will be joining us for the entire evening," he announced, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I have an important announcement to make." During dinner, the room had grown uncomfortably quiet, guests pretending not to stare while watching the drama unfold. My 14-year-old twins, who had been helping serve appetizers, stood frozen near the buffet table, confusion evident on their faces. It was my father who broke the tension, approaching with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "James, I see you've brought a guest. How lovely. Diana, welcome to our home. I'm Richard Reynolds, Catherine's father and founder of the company we're celebrating tonight." As he guided them toward the dining room with practiced ease, he caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. In that moment, something in his expression told me he had been expecting this, or something like it, and that he had come prepared. What I couldn't have known then was that this evening would change everything, not just my marriage, but the future of our family business and my understanding of both my husband and my father. And it would all begin to unravel when my father finally stood up to speak. Growing up as a Reynolds in Oakridge meant carrying both privilege and responsibility. My grandfather had started Reynolds Enterprises in his garage in 1973, manufacturing specialized machine parts for the agricultural industry. My father, Richard, had transformed it from a small operation into the region's leading manufacturer, employing over 500 people and supplying components to companies across the country. Our family home, a restored Victorian mansion on Maple Avenue, had been purchased when the company landed its first major contract. I spent my childhood exploring its many rooms, hiding in the library with books while my father met with business associates in his wood-paneled study. The carved mahogany desk where he signed those early contracts became a symbol of our family's success, and later, a treasured piece in my own home office. My mother, Eleanor, had been the heart of our family before cancer took her when I was 19. She was the one who insisted that Reynolds Enterprises treat employees like extended family, establishing traditions like the annual dinner and the education fund for employees' children. After she passed, my father threw himself into preserving her legacy, both at home and at the company. "Business is about more than profit margins," he would tell me during our weekend walks through the Reynolds manufacturing plant. "It's about creating something that matters, something that supports not just our family but all the families who depend on us." I took these lessons to heart, earning my business degree and MBA with the intention of continuing what my parents had built. Unlike many of my classmates who sought positions with prestigious firms in major cities, I never questioned my path. Reynolds Enterprises wasn't just a company to me, it was my heritage and my future. When I met James in my final year at Wharton, his charm and ambition seemed perfectly aligned with my values. He spoke passionately about ethical business practices and community investment, presenting himself as someone who believed in building relationships rather than just making deals. His background, son of a high school teacher and a nurse from a modest suburb of Chicago, only made his business acumen more impressive. "I want to create something meaningful," he told me on our third date, as we shared coffee at a small cafe near campus. "Not just chase the next bonus or promotion." My father was cautiously optimistic when I brought James home during spring break. He spent hours showing James around the factory, introducing him to employees who had worked for Reynolds for decades. James asked insightful questions, seeming genuinely interested in the company's operations and culture. "He's smart," my father acknowledged later, "and he seems to understand what makes Reynolds special. But remember, Catherine, actions speak louder than words. Time will tell if he truly values what we've built here." Our wedding was held in the gardens of the Reynolds estate, with employees and their families among the guests. James had by then completed his MBA and accepted my father's offer to join the company as a project manager. The position was entry-level, despite James's qualifications. My father believed in learning a business from the ground up. "If you're going to lead someday, you need to understand every aspect of what we do," he explained to James. "Every person's contribution matters." James surprised me by embracing this philosophy wholeheartedly. He arrived early each day, often joining the manufacturing team for their morning briefing. He spent weekends reviewing production reports and researching industry innovations. Within 2 years, he had earned a promotion to department manager, with the respect of both the board and the production staff. When I became pregnant with the twins, James was supportive beyond my expectations. He adjusted his schedule to accompany me to appointments, researched the best childcare options, and even painted the nursery himself. During a complicated pregnancy that left me on bed rest for the final trimester, he stepped up to manage both my responsibilities at the company and the household arrangements for the baby's arrival. "You focus on growing our family," he insisted. "I'll handle everything else." Emma and Ethan were born on a snowy January morning in 2009. James was by my side throughout the 18-hour labor, his steady presence a comfort during the difficult delivery. When he held our children for the first time, the look of wonder and love on his face confirmed everything I believed about him, that he was a man who valued family above all else. The early years of parenthood coincided with the economic recession, bringing challenges to both our family and the company. While other manufacturers in the region laid off workers or shuttered completely, Reynolds Enterprises maintained its workforce, though profits suffered. My father, James, and I took substantial pay cuts, redirecting those funds to keep production lines running. "We don't abandon our people when times are tough," my father declared during a tense board meeting. "They've stood by this company, and we will stand by them." James supported this decision publicly, though privately he expressed frustration. We could streamline operations and maintain profitability, he argued during one late-night discussion in our home office. Temporary layoffs would position us to emerge stronger when the economy recovers. That's not how Reynolds operates, I reminded him. Our employees aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They're the reason for our success. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you. So if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. He conceded the point, and together we developed alternative cost-cutting measures that preserved jobs while reducing expenses. The strategy worked. Reynolds Enterprises weathered the recession without layoffs, and our employee loyalty translated to increased productivity when the economy improved. By the twins' 5th birthday, both the company and our family seemed to be thriving. James had been promoted to operations director, overseeing multiple departments with impressive results. His innovative production methods had increased efficiency by nearly 30%, and his supplier renegotiations had reduced material costs substantially. The board, including my father, recognized his contributions with commendations and bonuses. At home, James was an engaged father who never missed a school event or soccer game. He coached Ethan's Little League team and helped Emma build award-winning science projects. Our family vacations, simple camping trips to nearby state parks or visits to historical sites, were filled with laughter and learning. We seemed to have achieved the perfect balance of professional success and family happiness. The first subtle changes appeared around the time James was being considered for the COO position. He began staying later at the office, citing the need to prove himself worthy of the promotion. Weekend family activities were increasingly interrupted by urgent work calls. He started golfing with board members and potential clients, spending Saturdays at the country club instead of at the children's sporting events. "It's temporary," he assured me when I expressed concern. "Once I secure the COO position, things will settle down." When the board unanimously approved his promotion, I expected our life to return to normal. Instead, James's focus on appearances and status intensified. He traded his modest sedan for a luxury sports car. He pressed for renovations to our already beautiful home, insisting we needed a more executive residence. His wardrobe shifted from business casual to custom suits, and he began suggesting I update my own conservative style. "We represent Reynolds Enterprises in the community," he reminded me when I questioned these changes. "People expect a certain image from executives of our caliber." My father noticed these shifts as well. During our weekly lunch, a tradition we had maintained since I joined the company, he gently probed about the changes in James's priorities. "Success can change people," he observed. "Not always for the better." "He's just embracing his new role," I defended. "The promotion came with a lot of pressure and visibility." My father nodded thoughtfully. "Just remember what your mother always said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them." I should have heeded his words more carefully. But like many women invested in their marriages and families, I chose to see what I wanted to see: a driven husband building security for our future, a dedicated father creating opportunities for our children, a business partner committed to our shared success. What I couldn't see then was how systematically James was preparing for a different future entirely, one that would become painfully clear that fateful anniversary night when he walked into our family home with Diana on his arm, ready to dismantle everything my family had spent generations building. The year leading up to our 15th anniversary was marked by subtle but significant changes in both our marriage and the company dynamics. James's promotion to COO had given him considerable influence at Reynolds Enterprises, and he began using it in ways that increasingly conflicted with our family's traditional business philosophy. Board meetings became tense affairs where James would present aggressive expansion plans that prioritized profit margins over employee well-being. When I raised concerns about maintaining the company culture during rapid growth, he would smile indulgently. "Catherine's sentiment for tradition is admirable," he would tell the board. "But in today's market, we need to focus on shareholder value rather than being everyone's favorite employer." The irony that our family held the majority of shares wasn't lost on me, but James had become adept at framing my perspective as outdated and emotionally driven rather than financially sound. Several board members, particularly newer additions, who hadn't worked with my father during his active leadership, began to side with James on key decisions. At home, James became increasingly critical of my appearance and social connections. My preference for classic, understated clothing became dowdy in his eyes. My friendships with longtime employees and their families were suddenly inappropriate boundary crossing for an executive. Even my involvement in the twins' school activities was reframed as micromanaging rather than engaged parenting. "The children need to develop independence," he insisted, when I questioned why he had hired a driver to take them to activities I had always handled. "And you need to focus on presenting yourself as a corporate leader, not a glorified soccer mom." These comments stung, but I rationalized them as James feeling pressure in his new role. I made concessions, updating my wardrobe, attending the social functions he deemed important, stepping back from some of my volunteer work at the children's school. Each compromise seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they were eroding my identity and confidence. The most troubling changes involved the company's treatment of employees. Reynolds Enterprises had always offered generous benefits, including comprehensive health care, retirement matching, and education assistance. Under James's direction, HR began modernizing these programs, introducing high-deductible health plans that saved the company money but transferred costs to employees, reducing retirement contributions, and replacing guaranteed bonuses with performance-based incentives that mysteriously became harder to achieve. When longtime employees expressed concerns, James implemented a new communication structure that required all feedback to go through department managers rather than directly to leadership. Coincidentally, several manager positions were filled with James's business school connections, people loyal to him who filtered information before it reached the executive level. "We're streamlining communication," he explained when I questioned these changes. "Efficient companies don't have employees dropping into the COO's office to chat about their benefits." My father, who still served as chairman of the board but had reduced his day-to-day involvement, began receiving calls from concerned employees who had known him for decades. During one of our weekly lunches, he shared his observations. "People are afraid, Catherine," he said gravely. "They're seeing changes that make them question the company's commitment to them. That's never happened in the history of Reynolds Enterprises." I promised to investigate, but when I requested detailed reports on recent policy changes, I hit unexpected roadblocks. Files were being updated, meetings were scheduled, then postponed, and information came with James's interpretations already attached. When I finally obtained the raw data on employee turnover and satisfaction, the results were alarming. We had lost more experienced staff in the past year than in the previous 5 combined, and employee satisfaction had dropped dramatically. When I presented these findings at the next executive meeting, James was prepared. Before I finished speaking, he distributed a glossy report titled Reynolds Enterprises, Modernization and Market Positioning. "Catherine's concerns about employee metrics reflect her compassionate nature," he began, effectively dismissing my data-driven presentation as emotional overreaction. "However, as this report demonstrates, our strategic realignment has positioned Reynolds for unprecedented growth and market expansion." The report contained impressive projections and competitor comparisons, but notably lacked historical context about what had made our company successful over the decades. By the meeting's end, my concerns had been reframed as resistance to positive change, and James was once again the visionary leader guiding Reynolds into a prosperous future. That evening, I found James in his home office, reviewing documents that he quickly minimized when I entered. When I tried to continue our discussion from the meeting, he sighed with exaggerated patience. "You're too emotionally attached to the old ways of doing things," he said, not looking up from his computer. "Your father built a good regional company, but I'm transforming it into a national competitor. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions." "Decisions that contradict our core values?" I challenged. James finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of pity and condescension. "Values don't pay dividends, Catherine. Results do. The board understands this even if you don't." I left his office feeling dismissed and belittled. Later that night, I noticed James taking a phone call in the garden, speaking quietly with frequent laughter. When I asked who had called so late, he mentioned a potential client in another time zone. I accepted his explanation, ignoring the unease that had been growing within me. The following weeks brought more concerning developments. James scheduled several business trips that coincided with important family events: Ethan's regional science competition, Emma's piano recital, my birthday. Each absence came with plausible business justifications and expensive gifts upon his return, as if merchandise could replace his presence. Perhaps most troubling was how James began subtly turning the twins against me. He would return from trips with extravagant presents and plans for exciting outings, positioning himself as the fun parent, while I maintained homework schedules and reasonable bedtimes. When I expressed concern about the children's growing materialism, he accused me of jealousy. "They're just excited that one of us has ambitions beyond maintaining the status quo," he remarked, after I questioned the appropriateness of the expensive smartphones he had given our 14-year-olds without consulting me. The children, navigating the complicated terrain of adolescence, were susceptible to this manipulation. Emma, especially, began mimicking James's dismissive attitude toward me, rolling her eyes when I spoke about company traditions or family responsibilities. Ethan remained more connected to me, but even he was drawn to the excitement and status James's new lifestyle promised. My father observed these dynamics with increasing concern during his weekly dinners with us. One evening, after James had taken the twins to the country club for tennis lessons, Dad finally voiced what I had been trying to ignore. "James is systematically undermining you, Catherine, at home and at the company. You need to ask yourself, why?" "He's just ambitious," I defended weakly. "He wants Reynolds to grow and the children to have advantages we didn't." My father's expression was pained. "Your mother and I gave you every advantage that matters: love, education, values, purpose. James is teaching the twins that things matter more than people. That image matters more than integrity. Those aren't advantages. They're handicaps." His words resonated more than I wanted to admit. That night, unable to sleep, I went to our home office to review some company files. James's laptop was open on the desk, his email visible on the screen. I had never invaded his privacy before, but something, intuition or self-preservation, made me look closer. The email thread displayed was between James and our corporate counsel, discussing revisions to the company's executive compensation structure. Attached was a draft proposal that would dramatically increase the COO's profit-sharing percentage while reducing the CEO's, my position, by a corresponding amount. The justification cited the COO's primary role in recent growth, initiatives, and the need to align compensation with actual operational leadership. As I scrolled through the email history, another name caught my eye: Diana West, copied on several exchanges, with James introducing her as our strategic consultant. Her responses were knowledgeable about Reynolds Enterprises' internal operations, information that would normally be highly confidential. A quick search of her name in James's email revealed hundreds of exchanges going back more than 8 months. Their tone shifted from professionally cordial to increasingly personal, with recent messages including dinner plans, hotel reservations, and discussions about a shared future. One email from just 3 days earlier made my blood run cold. Final. Steps in place. Legal confirms the proxy voting rights attached to the family shares can be exercised by either named executive. Board presentation ready for Thursday. Looking forward to finally making our partnership official, in every sense. I sat frozen, connecting pieces that had been in front of me for months. The mysterious strategic consultant whose reports always supported James's positions. The business trips that coincided with suspicious gaps in communication. The gradual isolation from my support network at the company. The systematic undermining of my authority and expertise. James wasn't just having an affair. He was orchestrating a complete takeover of Reynolds Enterprises, using my family's company as both the setting and the prize for his betrayal. As the full picture emerged, I realized the anniversary dinner was not just a celebration. It was meant to be a coronation. James intended to announce some sort of restructuring that would effectively transfer control from me to him, with Diana by his side. The timing, the guest list heavy with board members and key clients, the special presentation my father had planned, all would provide the perfect stage for James's power play. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. My first instinct was confrontation, to wake James and demand explanations for his betrayal. But something my father had taught me long ago resurfaced. In business and in life, there's a time to speak and a time to listen. Sometimes the most power comes from allowing others to reveal themselves fully before you show your hand. Instead of confronting James, I sent a text to my father. Need to talk before tomorrow's dinner. Early breakfast? Urgent. His response came instantly, as if he had been waiting. 7 a.m. My house. I'll have the files ready. I didn't know what files he meant, but his immediate understanding of the situation was both unsurprising and deeply comforting. As I had been discovering James's betrayal, it seemed my father had been preparing for it, and possibly planning. A countermove of his own. I arrived at my father's house at exactly 7 a.m., having barely slept. The colonial-style home where I had grown up was smaller than the mansion James and I now occupied, but it had always felt more like a true home. Solid, unpretentious, filled with memories of real family connections rather than carefully curated displays of wealth. Dad was waiting in the kitchen, a pot of coffee already brewed, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents spread across the kitchen table. He looked up when I entered, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "You found out," he said simply. Not a question, but a statement. "Last night," I confirmed, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. James's emails. He and Diana West have been planning some kind of executive restructuring. They're going to announce it at the dinner tonight. Dad nodded grimly. I've been tracking their moves for months. Diana West isn't just James's mistress. She's a corporate restructuring specialist known for helping executives strip and sell off family businesses. They've been quietly meeting with Archer Industrial Group. The name hit me like a physical blow. Archer was our largest competitor, a multinational conglomerate known for acquiring smaller companies, extracting their valuable assets and client lists, then shutting down local operations and moving production overseas. James wouldn't sell to Archer, I protested weakly. He knows what they do to the companies they acquire. Our employees would lose everything. James doesn't care about our employees, Dad said, his voice uncharacteristically hard. He never did. He cared about gaining control of a successful company without having to build one himself. You were his entry point. Reynolds Enterprises was always his target. The bluntness hurt, but I couldn't deny the truth in his words. I thought about the board's growing deference to James, the policy changes that had steadily eroded our company culture, the careful distancing of longtime employees loyal to the Reynolds family. How could I have been so blind? I whispered. My father reached across the table and took my hand. You saw what you wanted to see, what any of us want to see in those we love. But now you need to see clearly, because we have less than 12 hours to prevent James from destroying everything your grandfather, your mother, and I built. Everything that was meant to be your legacy and the twins after you. He pushed several documents toward me. The top one was a corporate bylaw amendment from Reynolds Enterprises' founding, one I had never seen before. Your grandfather was a cautious man, Dad explained. When he incorporated the business, he included special protections to ensure the company would always remain under family control. The primary protection was the creation of Class A and Class B shares. Class A shares, the family shares, carry 10 votes each. Class B shares, those owned by other investors including James, carry 1 vote each. The controlling interest has always remained with Class A shareholders. I knew about the dual-class structure, but had never paid much attention to the specific voting rights. As CEO, I handled operational decisions while the board, chaired by my father, oversaw major strategic moves. When your mother died, Dad continued, I transferred a portion of my Class A shares to you, but retained the majority myself. When James joined the company, we discussed eventually transferring some Class A shares to him, but I insisted on a waiting period. Instead, we granted him Class B shares as part of his executive compensation. He slid another document toward me, a proposed board resolution that had never been enacted. This would have converted some of James's Class B shares to Class A after 10 years with the company, giving him voting rights equal to a family member. I prepared it for the board 5 years ago, but something made me hold back. Your instincts? About him, I acknowledged. Dad nodded. As James climbed the ranks, I watched how he operated, always taking credit, never accepting blame, prioritizing appearance over substance. Not the values we built this company on. So I kept the resolution in my desk drawer. But how does this help us now? I asked. James is still planning something for tonight, something involving proxy voting rights. That's what made me certain my suspicions were correct, Dad said, producing another document. 3 months ago, James approached the corporate council about implementing a proxy voting system for executive leadership. The proposal seemed reasonable on its surface, allowing the CEO or COO to vote on behalf of the other in case of absence from critical decisions. I remembered signing several governance updates around that time, part of a larger package of modernization efforts James had championed. The proxy authorization had seemed minor among more substantial changes. What you didn't realize, Dad continued, is that the wording created a loophole. Under certain conditions, it would allow the COO to exercise voting rights attached to both executives' shares in situations involving significant strategic opportunities requiring expedited decision-making. My stomach sank as I realized the implications. So tonight, James plans to present the Archer acquisition offer as a time-sensitive strategic opportunity, activate the proxy voting provision, and use your own voting rights against you to approve the sale. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, it momentarily took my breath away. But even with my votes, he wouldn't have controlling interest. The Class A shares would still give us the majority, Dad confirmed, which is why James and Diana have also been working on this. He pushed forward a draft press release announcing my leave of absence from Reynolds Enterprises due to personal health concerns, with James assuming temporary control of all my responsibilities, including, presumably, my voting rights. They're going to claim I'm unstable, I realized, the pieces falling into place. That's why he's been telling the board I'm too emotional, too attached to tradition. Why he's been making me seem increasingly irrational at home and at work. Classic gaslighting, Dad agreed grimly. Setting the stage to question your judgment when you inevitably object to his plans. A cold anger replaced my initial shock. What's our countermove? My father smiled for the first time that morning, a smile I recognized from countless business negotiations where opponents had underestimated Richard Reynolds. First, I never filed the final paperwork on that proxy voting provision, he revealed, sliding over a legal opinion from our longtime family attorney. Corporate counsel drafted it, but as chairman, I have to approve governance changes before they're officially implemented. I've been reviewing it for 3 months. Relief washed over me. So James can't actually use my votes. Not legally, no, but more importantly, Dad produced a final document, this one bearing the official seal of the state business registry. Yesterday, I executed the final transfer of additional Class A shares to you, not the 20% we had discussed, eventually giving to James, but an additional 30% of my holdings. You now control 51% of all Class A shares, giving you unequivocal control of Reynolds Enterprises regardless of what James attempts tonight. I stared at the transfer document, my name clearly listed as the recipient of these powerful voting shares. You planned this. I hoped I was wrong about James, Dad admitted, but I wasn't going to gamble my life's work or your future on that hope. The transfer is already registered with the state and our corporate records. It's irrevocable. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt a sense of solid ground beneath me. So, what do we do at the dinner? Confront him immediately? Daddy leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I think we let James make his move first. Let him reveal himself fully to everyone present, the board members, the management team, even the twins. Let him stand up and announce his grand plan to sell Reynolds Enterprises to Archer Industrial. And then? And then I stand up, Dad said, with quiet certainty, and I inform everyone present of the actual ownership structure of Reynolds Enterprises, of James's unauthorized discussions with Archer, and of the legal consequences of attempting to sell company assets without proper authority. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing company documents, preparing key points, and contacting our family attorney to be present at the dinner. We also called Sophia Chen, our chief legal officer and a close family friend, who had been increasingly sidelined by James over the past year. She agreed to review the relevant documents and attend the dinner, arriving early with printouts of the official ownership records. As we finalized our strategy, I thought about the twins, who would witness whatever unfolded. Dad, what about Emma and Ethan? This will be devastating for them. My father's expression softened. They deserve to know who their father really is, Catherine. James has been manipulating them just as he's manipulated you and the board. They're Reynolds' children, strong enough to handle the truth. He was right, of course. The twins had been raised with our family's values, even if James had recently been trying to undermine those lessons. They deserved honesty, however painful. Before leaving my father's house, I made one more call to my closest friend Jennifer, who had been increasingly excluded from our social circle as James deemed her too provincial for our new status. I asked if she could be available after the dinner to support me and possibly help with the twins. Her immediate, unconditional of course reminded me of the genuine connections I had allowed James to damage. As I drove home to prepare for the evening, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: anger at James's betrayal, sorrow for my children, determination to protect the company and its employees. But underneath it all was something unexpected: relief. The pretense was over. No more doubting my perceptions, questioning my judgment, or compromising my values to maintain a marriage that had become a carefully constructed lie. Tonight, James would make his move, thinking he held all the cards. But for the first time in years, I would be seeing clearly, standing firmly on the foundation my family had built, ready to protect what truly mattered. Not the appearance of success that had become James's obsession, but the substance of a legacy worth preserving. The Reynolds estate was transformed for the anniversary dinner. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with arrangements of ivory roses and silver candelabras. Elegant but understated, reflecting the values that had guided our family business for generations. The catering staff bustled, efficiently, directed by Mrs. Harmon, who had managed special events at Reynolds Enterprises for over 20 years. I had returned home that afternoon to find James supervising last-minute arrangements, his manner distracted and tense. When he noticed me, his expression shifted to the carefully cultivated charm I now recognized as entirely artificial. "There you are," he said, kissing my cheek perfunctorily. I was beginning to worry. "Everything needs to be perfect tonight." "Yes," I agreed, meeting his eyes steadily. "It's an important evening for the Reynolds family." Something in my tone made him pause, studying my face for a moment, before dismissing whatever concern had flickered across his features. "I've asked Diana to join us at the head table. As our strategic consultant, she should be part of the executive presentation." "Of course," I replied, my calm clearly unsettling him. "I look forward to hearing more about her work with Reynolds Enterprises." James blinked, momentarily thrown by my lack of objection. "Good. That's good. I need to finish getting ready." As he headed upstairs, I sought out Emma and Ethan, finding them in the garden pavilion setting up a display of company photos for the anniversary tribute. My heart ached seeing them there, so young, so unaware of how their world would change in just a few hours. "Mom!" Ethan spotted me first, waving enthusiastically. "Grandpa dropped off more photos. Look at this one of you and Dad when you first started working together." The photograph showed James and me standing proudly in front of the main production facility, both in Reynolds Company jackets, my father between us with his arms around our shoulders. We looked so happy, so full of shared purpose. Had it all been a calculation on James's part? Had there ever been genuine love, genuine commitment to our family and company? Emma, more reserved since entering her teens, was arranging photos by decade. "Grandpa says these should go at the beginning of your presentation," she said, handing me a small stack of images. Something about remembering foundations. I looked through them. My grandfather at his workbench, my parents at the groundbreaking for the factory expansion, my own college graduation with my father proudly presenting me with my first official Reynolds Enterprises business card. Foundations indeed. "Thank you both for helping with this," I said, hugging them briefly. "No matter what happens tonight or in the future, never forget that you are Reynolds' children. That means something, not because of money or status, but because of values, character, and how we treat others." They exchanged confused glances but nodded. I left them to finish their preparations, knowing that by evening's end, they would understand all too well what I meant. By 7 o'clock, guests had begun to arrive. Board members in formal attire, longtime employees and their spouses, key clients and community partners who had been part of the Reynolds extended family for decades. I greeted them in the grand foyer, conscious of James watching me from across the room, Diana now by his side in an elegant red dress that strategically outshone my own blue cocktail dress. My father arrived exactly on time, accompanied by our family attorney Howard Blackwell and Sophia Chen, our chief legal officer. They greeted me warmly, with Howard discreetly confirming that he had the necessary documentation in his briefcase. As we moved into the main reception hall, I noticed several board members watching our interaction with curiosity. James had been gradually isolating me from the legal team for months, and this visible alliance was clearly unexpected. Dinner proceeded according to plan, with 5 courses served as guests mingled and reminisced about the company's history. James, seated between me and Diana at the head table, grew increasingly impatient, checking his watch and exchanging meaningful glances with Diana. My father, seated opposite us, maintained a pleasant conversation with board members while periodically catching my eye with reassuring nods. After dessert was served, James signaled to the staff to prepare for presentations. The lights dimmed slightly as a projection screen descended at the front of the room. James stood, tapping his glass for attention. "Distinguished guests, loyal employees, and friends," he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed extensively. "We gather tonight to celebrate not just 15 years of marriage between Catherine and myself, but 50 remarkable years of Reynolds Enterprises." Polite applause followed as James clicked to the first slide, a photo of my grandfather in his original workshop. From humble beginnings, Reynolds has grown into a regional powerhouse, and tonight I'm excited to announce that we stand on the threshold of an unprecedented opportunity for growth. The next slide displayed the Archer Industrial Group logo alongside Reynolds Enterprises. A murmur ran through the crowd as employees recognized our largest competitor's emblem. "In today's global market, scale is essential for survival," James continued smoothly. "After months of careful negotiation, I'm pleased to announce that Reynolds Enterprises will be joining the Archer family of companies, creating a manufacturing powerhouse with international reach." The room erupted in confused whispers. James raised a hand for silence, his expression benevolent but firm. "Change can be concerning, I understand, but this strategic alliance will secure Reynolds's future in an increasingly competitive landscape." He clicked to a slide showing financial projections with dramatic upward trends. "The board will receive formal acquisition documents tomorrow, but as COO and authorized proxy for CEO voting rights, I've already signed preliminary agreements with Archer's leadership team." Diana nodded encouragingly beside him, her hand resting possessively on the table near his. "I'd like to introduce Diana West, who has been instrumental in structuring this transaction," James continued. "Diana will be joining the transition leadership team as we integrate Reynolds operations into the Archer framework." Diana stood, her professional smile not quite masking the triumph in her eyes. "Thank you, James. I'm excited to help guide Reynolds through this transformation. While there will naturally be some consolidation of facilities and operations, we anticipate maintaining a presence in the community." The euphemism wasn't lost on the employees present. Some consolidation meant factory closures and layoffs. A presence suggested a skeleton operation at best. The room had grown deathly quiet, all eyes now moving between James and me, waiting for my reaction. James turned to me with a smile that held both challenge and warning. "Catherine, as someone who has carried the Reynolds legacy forward so capably, would you like to share a few words about this exciting new chapter?" It was the moment of truth, the public handover James had orchestrated, where I would either acquiesce to his plan or be portrayed as emotionally unstable for opposing it. He clearly expected either compliance or an outburst, both of which would serve his purposes. I stood slowly, straightening my shoulders and meeting his gaze directly. "Actually, James, I believe my father would like to address the room first, as founder and chairman of the board." Confusion flickered across James's face as my father rose from his seat, command naturally emanating from his tall figure and authoritative presence. "Thank you, Catherine." Dad nodded to me before turning his attention to the assembled guests. "I've listened with interest to my son-in-law's announcement. It's certainly unexpected." His dry tone drew nervous laughter from some guests. James's jaw tightened. "Before we proceed with celebrating this supposed acquisition," Dad continued, "I believe it's important to clarify a few legal matters." He gestured to Howard, who produced a folder of documents. "First, regarding the proxy voting rights James Dodd referenced, I have here confirmation from our corporate counsel that this provision was never finalized or implemented. As chairman, I never approved the final documentation." James's face drained of color. "That's a technicality. The board approved the concept." "Second," Dad continued as if James hadn't spoken, "I have here the current shareholder registry of Reynolds Enterprises, showing the distribution of Class A and Class B shares. As you can see, Catherine Reynolds, Thornton now controls 51% of all Class A shares, which carry 10 votes each compared to the single vote of Class B shares." He handed the document to the nearest board member, who reviewed it with widening eyes before passing it to others. This means Catherine alone controls the majority of voting rights in the company, making any agreement signed without her explicit approval legally void. Diana's hand had withdrawn from James's vicinity, her calculating eyes now assessing the shifting power dynamics. James himself seemed frozen in disbelief. Finally, Dad concluded, I have documentation of unauthorized discussions with a competitor, conducted without board knowledge or approval, which may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty and violation of non-disclosure agreements signed by all executives. The silence in the room was absolute, as my father turned to face James directly. So, son, unless you have board resolutions and properly executed agreements that I'm unaware of, it appears you've significantly overstepped your authority. All eyes turned to James, whose confident facade had crumbled entirely. He looked frantically at Diana, who was already edging away from the head table, her expression now carefully neutral. This is a misunderstanding, James attempted, his voice lacking its earlier authority. The discussions with Archer were preliminary, exploratory. The documents in your office safe suggest otherwise, I said quietly, finally speaking. Do your emails with Ms. West, discussing how to leverage the proxy voting rights you believed you had secured. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Emma and Ethan, seated at a nearby table, watched with expressions of growing horror and confusion. James's desperation turned to anger. You went through my private correspondence? My office? Our correspondence, I corrected gently. Our office. Our company. The one my family built, that you were planning to dismantle for your personal gain. Standing now, facing James across the table that suddenly seemed like a chasm between two worlds, I felt an unexpected calm. The question now isn't about preliminary discussions or misunderstandings. It's about trust, integrity, and the future of Reynolds Enterprises. I turned to address the room, making eye contact with longtime employees whose livelihoods had nearly been sacrificed. Reynolds Enterprises is not for sale. It never has been. Our commitment to our employees, our community, and the values that built this company remains unchanged. Applause erupted spontaneously, led by workers who had feared for their jobs moments earlier. Through it all, James stood immobile, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. When the applause subsided, I faced him one final time. I think it's best if you and Ms. West leave now. My attorney will contact you tomorrow regarding next steps. You can't do this, James hissed, leaning across the table. You need me. The company needs me. You're nothing without— That's enough. My father's voice cut through James's growing tirade. He moved to stand beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. You've revealed yourself quite thoroughly tonight, James. Don't compound the damage by making threats you can't enforce. Something in my father's tone, perhaps the absolute certainty, perhaps the implied warning, finally penetrated James's anger. He straightened, adjusting his tie in a futile attempt to recover his dignity. This isn't over, he said quietly. For our ears only. You'll regret this, Catherine. No, James, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly years ago. Goodbye. As James and Diana made their awkward exit, the room buzzed with shocked conversations. I immediately sought out Emma and Ethan, who sat stunned at their table. Kneeling between their chairs, I took their hands in mine. I'm so sorry you had to witness that, I said gently. Your father made some decisions that have hurt our family and threatened many people's livelihoods. There will be difficult days ahead, but we will get through them together. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Did Dad really try to sell the company? What about all the people who work there? He did, I confirmed, not sugarcoating the truth. But the company is safe now, and so are the jobs. Emma, always quicker to anger than her brother, looked toward the door where James had exited. He was going to use us, wasn't he? All those gifts, all those promises. they were just to make us take his side. Her perception hurt my heart, but confirmed that at 14, she was already developing the discernment I had somehow lost along the way. Your father loves you in his way, I said carefully. But yes, he's been trying to influence you against me and against the values this family stands for. My father joined us, placing his hands on the twins' shoulders. Reynolds' children are made of stronger stuff, he reminded them, echoing words he had said to me countless times throughout my life. We face hard truths, we protect what matters, and we always take care of our people. The remainder of the evening transformed into something unexpected. Not the celebration of a corporate acquisition, but a reaffirmation of what Reynolds Enterprises had always represented. Board members approached to pledge their support. Employees shared their relief and gratitude. Even as the logistics of unwinding James's damage loomed before me, I felt a foundation beneath my feet that had been missing for too long. Later that night, after guests had departed and the twins had finally fallen asleep, my father and I sat in the garden where just 24 hours earlier, James had been secretly speaking with Diana. "How did you know?" I asked, the question that had been on my mind throughout the day. "About James, about what he was planning. You were prepared before I ever discovered anything." Dad looked up at the stars, his expression thoughtful. I recognized something in him that I've seen before in business. People who want the rewards, without the work, the status without the responsibility. Your mother would have spotted it immediately. He smiled sadly. She always said you had my mind but her heart. Brilliant at business but eager to see the best in people. It's not a weakness, Catherine. It's what makes you a better leader than I ever was. You just needed to learn when to protect that heart from those who don't deserve it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day settling around us. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and restructuring, explanations for the twins, and decisions about the future. But tonight had brought clarity, and with it, an unexpected sense of freedom. When James said, "She'll be taking your place," he thought he was announcing my replacement. I reflected. What he didn't understand is that my real place was never just as his wife. It was as a Reynolds, as my father's daughter, as my children's mother, as the guardian of something built with integrity over generations. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "And no one," he said firmly, "absolutely no one, could ever take that from you." As we sat together under the stars, I felt the truth of his words settle deep within me. James had brought his mistress to our family dinner and smugly declared she would take my place. But when my father stood up, everything had indeed changed. Not in the way James intended, but in the way the Reynolds family had always faced challenges. Together, with courage, integrity, and an unshakable commitment to what truly matters. Coming. Up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.